We've got about 3/4 of an hour, maybe a few more minutes than that, to talk about what I mentioned in the last session, the idea of a Lush Birds network, which is an acronym for Biodiversity in Rural Development Systems. Yeah, that worked quite well, didn't it? So it's this idea of biodiverse buying and the work that we've been doing with BirdLife International, introducing us to many of their fantastic local groups. So I'm going to talk you through that, and then we'll hear a little bit about the different approaches from a few of those local groups, in particular about the approach to landscape management on the wider scale, not just protected areas. So I'm just going to start with a little video. Is Guven sitting in the way of the video? You sit here for a second. Okay, this will explain it better than I can, hopefully. For the serious bird watchers, and I know there's a lot in this audience, you know, you can make a note of the things that need editing for the final draft before it goes onto the internet. This is a first one. It's quite emotional, isn't it? Let me just do some introductions first of all. Do you just want to say who you are and who you work for? A quick round.
Good morning. My name is Ines Jordana. I work for the BirdLife partner in Spain. That's SEO BirdLife.
Hi, my name is Samir Whitaker. I work in the business and nature team at BirdLife International, based in Cambridge.
Asad Serhal, Society for the Protection of Nature, BirdLife Global Counselor for the Middle East.
My name is Güven Eken. I'm the science advisor of DOA, BirdLife Turkey.
Okay, and so the idea of this was that, you know, 99.9% recurring, or we should actually have this stat, but I don't, of Lush's ingredients are natural ingredients, and so they're coming from farming systems or semi-natural ecosystems or relatively intact forests, and so we have the possibility, given that farming has such a big impact on biodiversity, to demonstrate that it's possible to get ingredients in ways that are positive for nature, positive for biodiversity. You know, given that 75% of the UK, for instance, is basically agricultural or livestock land. You know, what happens in the wider landscape, not just in protected areas, is absolutely crucial for biodiversity. So we have this idea that because we buy ingredients from around the world, the places we buy from could be little acupuncture points of good habitat and good conservation projects, which are also good for the local people. And the migrating birds theme is a kind of initial way into it, because birds can find habitats. If you do a bit of restoration, they're likely to find it, and people get interested in birds quickly. And the fact birds connect us to each other, you know, some of these birds we share between the different projects, which... So this is the idea. And so I was talking about this with colleagues in Lush and was delighted to hear Lush have had quite a long-standing relationship with BirdLife International already, with the perfect people to raise this possibility with. So Samir, do you want to tell us a bit about BirdLife International and this incredible network?
Thanks, Tom. So BirdLife International is a network-based organization. We have 120 partners globally who are doing amazing work. So, for example, Doga in Turkey, SPNL in Lebanon, SEO in Spain. Our job at the Secretariat in Cambridge is to really make these kinds of connections. So global organizations with large networks who have mutually shared goals of conservation need local partners in order to actually carry that work out on the ground and make sure that it's sustainable in the long term. So for me, what really kicked this project off in my head was a drawing that Simon Constantine did, which was just, you know, a fairly rough sketch. What it showed was, I think it was a traditional, like a thatched grass hut somewhere in Kenya on the map, linking back through a migratory flyway, possibly, I'm just imagining this maybe, but back to Poole in Dorset, where the Lush buyer is sitting. So it's really making that connection to what we're using
sure,
here.
Swallows would be doing that, for instance.
Swallows would be doing that, exactly. Making the connection between buying in the UK and improving local communities as well as conservation on the ground in all of these places that are so crucial for migratory birds.
And I mean, this started a couple of years ago, and maybe you can tell us about you've now done 3 studies for us that got us up and running and made the introductions to your local groups. Give us a run through of some of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the one thing I wanted to mention was that BirdLife does an annual review globally of all bird species, the status of all bird species globally. And I mean, one of the things that's telling us is there's 400 million less birds in Europe than there were 30 years ago. What does that mean? It means we're basically running out of space for birds to use. And what are the drivers of that? Obviously, land use change is one of the biggest drivers. You saw earlier that 25 million birds are killed annually illegally in the Mediterranean region, so that's another huge driver. So these are both issues that Lush are supporting the BirdLife Network to work on, and particularly working on sustainable land use is one of the key focal points of the program. So in Tong Piamidas, with this idea, what we looked at was what can we do along migratory flyways to really improve the sites that birds are using along flyways to rest, to refuel. When birds migrate, they're really on an energetic knife's edge. If they don't find a site that they've used the year before to refuel, they're probably not going to make it to the next site. So that was really the idea behind this. So the first study was focused on the African Eurasian flyway, which is sort of 4 in the map right now. And some of the ideas that came out were traditional olive oil from Turkey and Lebanon, salt from Bulgaria, Spain. We looked at a possible new product, which was Balanites oil from Burkina Faso.
Which took us a long time, but because of the summit, having this we wanted to showcase some new biodiverse buying ingredients. So now we have Balanites oil in desert date scrub. I don't know who the inventor was who did this, but this is you saw in that bit of footage some of the the Sahel area. Probably that was northern Ghana, where we buy shea butter from. I'm guessing that's where that footage came from, which is a really important, the humid zone just under the Sahara, all the migrating birds, 2 or 3 billion of them stocking up on food before and after crossing the Sahara each year. They need that shea belt, and BirdLife have given us some really good advice on how we can work with the Ajoba Collective on that project. The Ajoba Collective, they're doing a really nice regreening project. But north of that, even in the kind of true Sahel and even into the Sahara, there's this balanites tree, which is very widespread in Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, and this came through BirdLife in the Netherlands as a possibility, and it takes a bit longer for us to incorporate these ideas, but we get there in the end. And for every litre of balanites oil, we should be able to keep at least a tree in the landscape, and so people aren't cutting them for charcoal or whatever else. So, that's probably quite a high proportion balanites oil, and that's, I don't know, what's that, fifth of a tree still in the landscape as a result. So sometimes we get new ideas from this as well. Yeah.
So I'm based on the success of the initial study. We're recreating this now for the Americas Flyway, and that report has just been finished. And we are just finalizing the same one for the East Asian, Australasian Flyway, and some of the options that are coming out of those include, for example, possibly mint from Bhutan, salt from Thailand around traditional salt pans, with salt pans that spoonbill sandpipers use to winter in, for example. And we hope for similarly exciting things to come out of the Americas study as well.
Yeah, and all sorts of coffee and cocoa options from good agroforestry systems and zero extinction sites, the cerulean warbler site, and another new one that we don't yet use, yerba mate from a BirdLife project. So we get these ideas, and what will end up happening, like in the Afro-Eurasian study, we had introductions to these 3 partners, and then they give you more ideas, and the idea is then when we're connected to these partners, we can say, is there anything else that we can do with you with our charitable giving? And so Guven gave a presentation of some of the small ways Lush has been supporting their wider work. And Assad will probably mention 1 or 2 things that we've started to do, and we hope to do more with SPNL in Lebanon. So we can do, and Inez introduced us to Salate, who now we're buying salt from the Bay of Cadiz, and then what can we do with spoonbill colony restoration in Cadiz? So we're getting this network and incredible network of connections and ideas flowing back and forth. And how have you found your international network in terms of responding to a request from a company? What can we buy? It's not the traditional conservation model.
In some cases, it takes a little bit of convincing because some of our NGOs have a slightly more adversarial relationship with the business sector traditionally.
What did you tell me the other day, Guven, about companies?
Well, DOGA has a very strict private sector policy, and virtually Lush is the only company which met our standards. We have very hard standards. Typically, we don't work with companies. Is that advertisement?
That's all I wanted you to say, yeah. Which is actually terrible when you think about it. That there's, but sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say that I think all of the partners quickly realized that Lush is not a traditional company, and even passing the strictest due diligence protocols. So I think just a little bit of initial hand-holding, but we're over that now.
It was quite interesting when we had our first meetings about this, because BirdLife were kind of quizzing us, and normally we're in the other situation. They were checking that we had the right ethics and practices, and you're doing your due diligence on us, which was reassuring for us, of course. But normally we're doing that to the people we buy from. So I'd like to just go through some of the work that SEO and SPNL and DOGA are doing on this landscape-wide approach of collaborating with agricultural landscapes and other productive landscapes, perhaps. Do you want me to do the clicker for your slides, or? Okay. So just to get an idea of the challenges and approaches of our partners here.
So for us, I mean, also following up on what Samir was saying, it's difficult to start working on something you are not used to work on. So in SEO, to be honest, we have realized a long time ago that we need to focus on the whole agricultural system, and that it's incredible if you ask I will speak from a European and from a European Union perspective. So we are quite okay with some of the biodiversity laws that we have and some of the national parks and protected areas we have. But if you still ask now in member states what is number one driver for biodiversity loss, it's still agriculture is the main driver. It's the governments answering this question to the European Commission, and it's a fact. So we are not only suffering from climate change, but also contributing to it. And Spain is like clearly one of the countries that will suffer within the Mediterranean context from this. So you see, it's like, in a way, it's a driver for biodiversity loss. In the other way, we see actually some sorts of agricultural systems are holding to most of the species. So we did a map that we found to be very interesting, which is on the left-hand side. We had all the different agricultures that are, I mean, it's all the agricultural land in Spain. So basically, most of Spain is agriculture. And then we have to classify that by kinds of agriculture. And the red ones that you see more to the west, and the ones that are in some yellow, they correspond to the ones that have better quality. I mean, they're high nature value farming. They overlap with the important birds. Areas.
The red one says agroforestry, so that's probably the Dehesa.
Dehesas, yes, which is a landscape that I think most of us share in the panel, actually. So it's this kind of mixed systems in which human has been also part of the agricultural landscape. And we realize that we really have to work in the whole of the Spain, but trying to focus on these high nature value farming systems, which in the next slide, I think, I put just some of the examples. So it's some sort of cereal stepland, and some of the dehesas, which is how we call these agroforestry systems, which are producing a lot of different, let's say, materials and for grazing and for cork and for different uses, and the human has been very much managing these areas now. Then there is the traditional permanent crops, that would be the olive groves and the vineyards that are been there for centuries and that are shaping our landscape as well. So it's basically in areas where it doesn't have to rain a lot, but they have adapted to the conditions. And then we really find that rice fields as well in certain areas are also one of these high nature value farming areas. And so we have now started working in all of these areas, trying to cover as much as we can, from focusing. Of course, we try to make industrial farming less harming for biodiversity, but we are really seeing that this is the place where we have to focus our efforts. But the good and the bad news is that this is everywhere in Spain. So we cannot just focus on certain areas. We really need to work with the farming system in Spain.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the panel members here have been particularly great at responding quickly to Samir's request for, are there conservation projects or land stewardship schemes, farmers who are good at working with biodiversity that we can engage with. I can see Juan Ignacio sitting in the audience. This is the olive oil that SEO introduced us to from Andalusia, so Juan will be speaking later in the day in the buying room. And Inez introduced us to Salate, the NGO that does the salt pan conservation. Juan's sitting there, and they introduced us to a great buyer. And we also explored other things that we haven't managed to make happen at rice from the Riet-Vel Delta, and some wheat production from farmers that look after busted breeding schedules with their cropping. But sometimes these things come off, and sometimes they don't. But we've got a couple off the ground so far.
So just to mention that we have, as Thomas said, it almost looks like we are not doing ourselves anything as the NGO. I mean, we're introducing now, this request came through, and we quickly saw, from our list of bird-friendly farmers, who could benefit from actually sourcing to a company like Lush. And then it's when actually we were not under control and communicating with our partner in Andalusia doing olive groves with more sustainable ways, or with the salt pans by Salarte. We just put them in contact and try to look for other people that would benefit from this approach. And that's how us as NGO, this is stewardship agreement. Sometimes they get finance, we get a project, and if you can put the next slide. So these are some projects that throughout the years in SEO, I mean, we've been clearly working on. And I joined a year and a half ago, but I found track of all projects that are covering on how to do little improvements in the farming areas, how to connect. We signed an agreement, now it's like a standard agreement on they agree to do a certain things that would benefit the land, and it could be very easy measures and not so costly, but sometimes they would need much more investment, and we are really struggling to get enough funding to make these agreements with we need more support to make that like a common practice so that they can implement the measures and that we can follow and monitor and have like bird sensors. And sometimes it's more a matter of that we both want. So our farmers sitting here in the audience, they will say they really want us to do more and we want them to do more. But there is just normally a lack of funding, and this is what Lush in a way is providing through these projects, because we had identified that there is areas to focus on, and now there's finally by good price in the quality of what they get. Lush is now supporting a wider landscape and also helping us really celebrate the champions that are still there, and then we try to work with more.
I mean, there's only so much of anything we can actually buy, but trying to tell the story and raise the paradigm and get other businesses involved. I know Samir works, in a general sense with corporate engagement. We have to try and build the paradigm. What's this one, Ines?
So I had just two more pictures. This is, we have a big LIFE project. LIFE, it's a funding that is given by the European Commission to conservation projects. So we, 3 years ago, realized that we really need to work in the Mediterranean in the olive groves, because actually we are getting, this project is called Olivares Vivos, Olive Alive. We have 20 farmers that are part of it, one of which is now sourcing to Lush. So it's one of these agreements, it's part of this bigger project. And we also have 20 control olive groves which are not participating or doing the improvement measures. And we're starting to see now the results on what it comes when you manage properly the land in the way that we were listening from Guven before, in a connected way, and providing really what the soil needs and trying to take care of the water scarcity. It's a common problem in the Mediterranean countries. So we're measuring now that when you take care of this, and this specific farm is doing that, the cooperative, the biodiversity improves by 60%. So just keeping the grass coverage, managing and having a proper system of plants that will cut off the
stone
water.
walls, and we'll hear more from Juan about exactly what he does later.
And all of these measures are really, now we're having scientific proof that they really help, and that we want to run a connection, let's say, hopefully a project that could run for all our countries, and that we make this the common practice and not the exception.
And you connect with various other, this was sort of what not to do, wasn't it?
Yes, that's the problem. That's what we found in many of the sites. These are the implemented measures and how birds are coming back. I mean, there is a potential to bring this still. It's totally, it's Olive Alive, the project, and it's real alive. It's showing that they come back if you just start taking care and put in some of the practices.
Great, thank you. So SEO are doing these sort of engagements with farms on stewardship schemes, which is the kind of Western European approach to it. Assad's, I mean, it's a real crime to ask Assad to do something in 5 minutes, but fortunately Assad's been interviewed by Charlie in two podcasts of, an hour and a quarter or something, which was in more detail. So you will want to listen to more of Assad, follow up that podcast. But tell us a bit about your challenges and your approach with Gemma.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Again, thanks for the opportunity from BirdLife International getting us together, and for Lush for being here and taking the time to listen to us. I'll try 5 minutes to say what we do as SPNL, BirdLife partners, and as Global counselor for the bird life in the Middle East, spreading the message of the hema and explaining what the hema is all about. It's an Arabic word that is still being used in English, French, and Latin and Arabic the same way it's spelled, hema. And hema means in Arabic protection. And it started as a tribal approach in Arabia, where the resource is very scarce, and the idea was to survive. And it lasted for thousands of years because it involves the community, and because it talks about survival the way we think or we don't think about the relationship between our life supporting system and our organs, vital organs. If you stop thinking or you start thinking about the way you breathe, then you realize the importance of your lungs to your brains. And that's what I think the hema is all about. It talks about survival, and its basics started and still is. It talks about that all nations, all people are partners in three things: food and the water, and back then it was wood that was very scarce for heating and food. It's energy, so everybody should be partner in this. It's a holistic approach between people and their environment. And hence why we are now trying to revive hema into the 21st century using the art and science we learned from the West in wildlife conservation, but stepping a step to the back, to the past, to learn how these people made it in such harsh circumstances and made it sustainable for us, and we're trying to destroy it in just a few years.
And HEMA is this sort of participatory land management approach, but super traditional and with a background in peace between communities,
exactly.
Right?
Yes. So the why landscape? Because everything is connected. And landscape, if you translate it in Arabic, it loses its meaning. So you lose the whole population. They don't know what you're talking about. It's probably like when we're talking about hema and you try to translate it, there's no translation to it. It's just you gotta comprehend what the idea is all about. But still, it is embedded in it so much other than protection. Like Abraham, when he came to Mecca and started his first hema, he did it for peace. Then when Prophet Muhammad came after him and he did Al-Madinah and the ravines and the mountains that connect them, they were thinking how all these different tribes protecting the landscape and their livelihood can find a place where it's neutral and everybody can get to know each other like Lush is doing for us today. So we're not scared from each other and we don't have these borders. And like our friend here showed us, the landscape, that's the way it is. Everything is connected. And we need to go back to these basics. So yes, it talks about conflict resolution, connectivity between humans and the landscape and other wildlife. So to do this, we gotta go back to the basics, but also to bring the new art and science and the reality and the socio-economic and geopolitical situation we live in under. And we have to do this with the new generation that have so much techniques that we didn't have with the social media that it blows your mind just to think now we're talking and millions of people are really watching us and maybe agreeing or disagreeing with us. So it's really an amazing thing.
Perhaps in a similar way to Guven was talking about the nature school at Doga Dernagi. You have your school with your Khomat al-Hema and the champions of the Hema with the youth and the school with no walls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now,
I just wanted to, with this slide, in terms of the flyways, this is the West Becker Valley, but that is a flyway. You can see it. that is the flyway.
Thanks to God, the birds still realize it and they know its importance. And that's why the science being done with BirdLife International, that took really thousands, if not millions of man hours in the last 100 years to define and agree on the important birds and biodiversity areas in the world. I can talk about our global network. We have now 12,000 important bird and biodiversity area on planet Earth. 800 of them is in the Middle East. And in the Europe and the Middle East, and we have 400 in the Middle East, and we have 15 in Lebanon. Now the thing and the challenge after you identify these sites, how do you tailor it into the local tradition and the local knowledge to conserve these sites? And that's where the challenge really starts with the culture that we are different at the end of the day, but we need to work together, and that's where the HEMA comes in. we were kind of like wondering for the last 30 years in BirdLife International why the important bird areas are not being conserved in the Middle East. It's a Western system that we need to define a local knowledge and local way to conserve it that is acceptable by the locals. And that's where the HEMA comes in. And because some of these important bird areas are not on government lands, they are on communal lands or with the farmers. And that's where Lush and SPNL and BirdLife came together and said, okay, now we find the way to do it in the Middle East, where we can talk to the farmer, we can talk to the fisherman, we can talk to the people that collects the salt, and then it makes socio-economic, if you like, interest for them to work with us for the conservation of migrating birds, and hence the connectivity.
And SPNL have a collaboration with Bioland, who are also at the summit and talking about olive oil later. So we're buying olive oil from a collaborator of SPNL, and a proportion of the price of the olive oil they channel to SPNL. So there's a kind of local economic model going on there, and we're helping out with bits and bobs with the HEMA rollout as well.
So, of course, income generating livelihood and all that is very important. So we don't only talk about the birds from an emotional point of view, but also for the local is very important, especially for the young. So they don't leave the countryside and the important bird areas and they go to the cities, or they just think about a visa to go to Europe or somewhere else for economic purposes. So that's where the ecotourism comes in, and the trails we're doing with Tom and Lush to do butterfly trails or bird trails, which we're doing in the HEMA now, and it makes more sense to the people, and also involving the government and the private sector, like Bioland you mentioned, and Lush Lebanon and others. The private sector is very important because that's where they know how to make business and to make money out of this, and make sure that people understand that conserving nature is good business. So now we are in partnership with the Ministry of Tourism, not only the Ministry of Environment, to do HEMA certification that goes with the norms and values that we operate together with Lush and others, that it's a respect for people, indigenous people, local knowledge, and also the other cultures and stuff like that, all the different norms we have. And it's being now certified in Lebanon. It's in the past, it used to be taken for granted, like they had HEMAs for honey production, and nobody will touch the flowers. They had HEMAs for the old horses and camels. Actually, there was one in Damascus for the last few years where they supposed to die gracefully after they used to serve you as a human being and to work with you in the fields. So they should have their own HEMA, and they had HEMAs for wood production, whatever. So
and this slide
everything
behind
was
you,
connected. Yes.
If people are wondering, is this idea from HEMA to HEMA of having walking trails that connect different livelihoods projects and agroturismo hotels and bird watching locations, such as in the West Bekaa Valley there, which is on this, the same flyway that your project's on, Guven, just a bit further down.
Tom?
Yes.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Who is actually taking part of the activities? So you put together these trails. It sounds very interesting, the ecotourism. Do you manage to have people from Lebanon caring about this, or is it all foreigners that will come?
No, it's the HEMA is the site, and Humat al-HEMA are the local young people from the site itself. They go through different trainings, from social marketing all the way to project development to bird identification that we do as SPNL with our partners, of course.
Taking people canoeing and rock climbing, they learn a whole load of different skills.
Of course.
And some of them set their own businesses up.
Yeah. And now we have what we call Humat al-HEMA International. That's a side business that's doing all the stuff that Tom was talking about, from production of honey or olive oil with a message to save the Syrian saran or migrating birds across the Mediterranean. So that's the kind of business we have with Bioland. But yes, of course, we have like OSMI is coming now with a group from England to walk these trails and also to promote and market these HEMAs abroad, so people bring in money to these sites and they live in with the local people in their houses, eat their food, and the shepherd could be like we have in one of these hammers here, shepherd trail. We try to brand them so the shepherd in this one, yeah, in Tarshish. So they can walk with the shepherd, explain to them, like we heard from Turkey, about the local landscape, why it's important to do this the way we do it, and that will be an extra income for them. So we protecting the birds, the help of the local community, but of course we're open, like we open with you now. We have a project, thanks to Mava. It's a Mediterranean project, not only for the Middle East, with the Dahsa system, which is similar to the Hema. And we have a partner in the Atlas Mountain in Morocco that they do Agdal. So SPNL, with the Norwegian government, we proposed to the IUCN General Congress a proposal for community-based conservation systems like the Hema for the Dahsas and Agdal, and it was adopted by 170 countries. It's Resolution 122, so we are very proud of that. And now we have a project that we can have a model across the Mediterranean to see how this works with the local community.
And we'll move on to Guven in just a second, but how many Hemas are there and what percentage of Lebanon do they now cover?
Yeah, maybe Tom will remember when we were in Prespa Lake 10 years ago, we were just discussing the idea and we had no Hemas. Now we have 21. So that tells you how fast it goes with little money and little effort. We are a small group. 21 representing almost 6% of Lebanon as Hema, but 16% as Hema and Mahmiyat. So that's in 10 years, because the local memory understands the difference between a nature reserve and a Hema. A Hema is open, people still practice their tradition, they make an income, they use the resources without destroying it and leaving it for the future generation. So we have 21 now, representing 6% and half of the important bird areas of the country. But not only in Lebanon, now it's catching up. There's 30 Hemas in Jordan. We created a Hema fund in Qatar, and now we trained our colleagues from Cyprus and Greece. So it's going to the Mediterranean on the Hema approach and the way we do it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, great. Let's. I told you it was impossible to ask a question when there's so much going on in 5 minutes, but nor can I cut you too short. Oh, this is Mfe, which we're not buying salt from yet, but it's another Hema, your first marine Hema, which would include the salt pans.
It's over 6,000 years old, created by the Phoenicians. That's where they took the alphabet from the shores of Lebanon to the world, but still operates. And they have the salt pans. They do it, as you've seen yesterday, by hand. It's really a living museum for culture and nature, important for the migrating birds in the Mediterranean.
These are the last salt
and
pans
it's the last
in Lebanon.
one still practiced as engraved in the stone in the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. And we're working with the Balamand University, one of the most important universities in Lebanon, the local fishermen community, and of course the Humat al-Hima, to try to preserve it. And the government have been trying to protect this land as a protected area, nature reserve, for the last 30 years. It didn't work. We went there just a few months ago, explained to them about the Hima, and they signed it, so it's a reality now. Mm-hmm. And thanks to Tom and Lush, they will be buying the salt from the locals, and that's going to be
the
big
plan.
encouragement. Let's hope it works.
But I mean, that's why we've got the exhibit downstairs about the salt milling, because we're finding, the adjustments we have to make, buying many different salts from many different projects to try and support these various locations. They all come in at slightly different humidity levels and particle sizes, and so we're looking at can we do our own bit of sort of milling to get things just how we want it, to make it easier to then go into the next wave, if you like, of supporting more salt projects. Sean in the audience from BirdLife mentioned a Montenegrin project we'd like to support possibly in the future, and MFA certainly one. And Samir mentioned one in the Bay of Bangkok, and there's another one in Brazil from the study that came through. So, Guven, indigenous production landscapes.
Again.
Yeah, but not everyone was here last time, and it will go out on a separate bit. So
thank you. Like five years ago, I spent 15 days with one of the last nomadic groups in the Taurus Mountains in Turkey. It was evening, the afternoon, and it started to rain. These people don't have proper houses as we do. They just live in tents, which they can, make in half an hour. And this culture is being there for thousands of years, of course. And it started to rain. The elder woman in the tent, the boss, she told us, I was guest and everybody else was the indigenous members of the family. She said us, do you see the fish swimming in the rain? Of course, at that time I didn't understand much. You may think this is a wisdom or she is a spiritual person. Actually, it's not. I went with her during her migrations long time, and she is a wonderful ecologist, I think. We see the objects. These people see the connections. Because when I asked to her, what do you mean by this? She started to explain to me calmly that, this rain is going to go to this little stream, and that little stream is going to end up with the tributary of that name. She was giving names of each single tributaries of the Göksu River. And finally, they will end up with the Göksu River, which goes to the Mediterranean, and they will bring the food of the fish. So she could see that top in the mountain at 1,800 meters. So I think this is something what we have lost through our modern education system. We see things in isolation. People like making hema or other people, indigenous people, see the connection, which I think science and conservation science badly requires nowadays, because we see the weaknesses of the modern national park approach. We are all BirdLife partners, and I think that makes us very unique. We are very lucky because we are connected physically through birds. So for us, it's much easier to catch up the connection. But for many other conservationists on Earth, for plant people, for mammal people, maybe it could be more difficult. But we are very lucky because birds connect all these countries throughout the year twice. They migrate from Northern Europe, they pass from the Middle East, Mediterranean, Turkey, Africa, and then they maintain that again and again. And more we learn that we no longer can protect our birds within our own territories. So that brings us into a totally new way of thinking, strategizing, planning conservation, because nothing in nature is disconnected. Actually, we are protecting things while locking things. If you want to protect a very valuable thing, we just lock it, we hide it. But nature, if nature wants to protect something, it connects it. When we get ill, we look for fresh air, we drink more, we feed better. So nature connects things. So it's a total way of different thinking. And I think there is a lot to learn for modern conservation science on that direction. And these are the similar things which we are experiencing in Turkey, as my colleagues from different parts of the Mediterranean told. Some of you have seen those pictures already. We can come back, Tom. Couple of more, one more maybe, yeah. So this is the landscape where we sell Lush oil, and simply the olive oil here is not really an agricultural product only. It's a side product of the forest, and the land is also not a forest, but although it's look like a forest, it's private land. And this system has been changed, next one, but to something else over time. Because we want to see, in an olive orchard, we want to see olives only. In a cereal field, we want to see cereals only. In an almond plantation, we want to see the almond trees only. We like maps and digitizing
we don't want to
the
see
borders.
That.
Well, I mean,
the big we
means most of
we.
the people outside these glasses. That's how many people in Turkey, in my country, in the UK, and many parts, we are educated to think like that. And this is the result. And I think we are lucky as BirdLife partners to start now thinking in a different way about conservation. And again, some of you have already seen these pictures. This could well be an alternative. There is no sowing going on here, no plowing the soil, no cultivating trees, no use of chemicals, nothing. Everything is just functioning. Everything is connected. There are maybe lands of at least 100 people here, but you don't see any borders, no fencing. Jackals and wildlife can move between the areas, and this is still good income for people. I mean, the people in this village are not poor at all. They don't suffer from poverty. There is resources for everybody,
And the point being
and
that
also for birds.
the indigenous production landscapes is thousands of years old. And so you're mapping these. It might be olive oil, it might be rose production, it might be salt production, and that's how we're collaborating with you guys. I'd be curious to know what. So we've heard a few different approaches. I've had to sort of keep the thing moving because Paul's just told me we've only got 5 minutes. But I'm curious to know what you think would be the steps forward for doing more of this and making it more of a success. Any of you?
This is not gonna sound very sexy, but I wanna say we need better policy in place. So we need to continue on, I think, supporting projects like this and telling the story and celebrating those that are doing a good job and getting data to demonstrate that this is the kind of model we want. But we need to start getting public money and all the funding that there is into the right way. So I think this is the exception up to now. These are projects here and there. Is a project-based approach. We need to make this an integrated approach, and we need to see that as a responsibility of each of us. So not just as consumers, we are told to be, we have to be responsible consumers, but as responsible citizens. So I think getting in, really plugging in with what the policy is changing, and in the European context now, the common agricultural policy is driving a lot of funding into the wrong kind of model, the one we don't want to see happening. It doesn't sound very interesting for the daily days, and it's complex, but we as organizations have to keep doing this, so we need your support and believing that these changes, once they happen, they're not project-based, but they have big impacts, and they will make the right biodiversity rural development standards the given, let's say.
Ways to scale things up from whether it's top-down or bottom-up, or...
And we need the companies to also support this, so we need more of Lush in this way, to also get more engaged with policy.
So for me, two things. One, just picking up on what you said, is that we need to mainstream this business model. It shouldn't just be Lush as a company that's seeing the business value of doing this, because ultimately we need consumers to be driving these decisions. We need companies to be providing these options to consumers to actually support these kinds of projects with their purchasing decisions. So it can't just be one company that's doing that. From our perspective, within BirdLife, what we really want to try and facilitate is the partner-to-partner engagement and work. There's so much good stuff going on. And in fact, it was Tom that's actually introduced us to all of these partners. We wrote the report, but we didn't really know too much about what was actually happening in the field. So we're learning about BirdLife through Lush. And we really want to try and support these projects on the ground and make these kinds of connections.
On that thought, I also like to stress the importance of partnership and connectivity, the way nature is. So this is one platform, BirdLife International, that have 100 partners in 120 countries doing things in a different way, but learning from each other. And this learning process is enhanced in platforms like this, outside the box, not only conservation people talking to each other, but private sector and people coming in from business perspective connecting us. And today, even though he is a BirdLife partner in Turkey and we're just a few kilometers away from each other, I learned about his almost a HEMA school, working with the local people. That's something we are thinking to connect to, because what we do HEMA, we do it with communities. And the challenge is how you connect to the private sector, to these little parcel of lands that are very important for biodiversity. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel, as you say here. Maybe we can have a joint project, like partner
like
to partner.
Sister projects, just
someone like this.
On the same flyway with the same birds.
Yes.
Ruben.
I think here, as many people say, the key word is connectivity among the BirdLife partners. among the local people, who has this knowledge, among the governments, between corporates and private sector and NGOs and people. We have to be open to learning new things. The world is much bigger than the knowledge we have in our heads. The more we become open to learn new things, new ideas, new methodologies, I think we will have more and more and more better examples. We won't fix the problem in a year time or in a very short period, but I'm very optimistic with what's going on around the world, because individuals, small groups, not really directly supported from big central groups like governments, companies, have now started to do sporadically very innovative solutions to protect biodiversity for their own sake, for their own livelihoods, whatever. I think the more there will be connectivity among these groups, like these people here and like probably the people here in the audience, there will be more examples and
connectivity
safer
to the
flyways for
Have we got time for
birds.
a question, Paul? Paul's left. And actually, I've just seen Miriam in the crowd. I wanted to do a shout out to Miriam, because Miriam is a collaborator of Lush in South Ghana. So the idea of this birds network is also that we collaborate in the locations we're already working. And Miriam's doing forest enrichment, planting and lake creation for birds. And I went and visited and saw honey buzzards who have migrated down through Lebanon. And they ended up on where Miriam lives in South Ghana. So we're also doing that kind of work in the Lush projects as well, the Lush Gardens projects. So I think we better wrap up there, but people are going to be around if you want to follow up with them, I hope.
Tom, could I just, one second?
Yes.
I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Lush. None of this work would have happened without the support of Lush. And I mean, your support, you're anchoring a bunch of different grassroots movements that are really going to lead to something big, I think. And no one else is doing what you're doing right now. So thank you to you, to Mark for his support, and to Lush in general as well.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.